Hi, in today's video we're going to take a look at a better way to manage your emacs init.el file using literate programming. Now the issue is your emacs init.el file can get quite large. Mine is over 2,000 lines long, so you can search for stuff, you know, MPV, and kind of scroll down like that to find things, but we don't have a outline of the document. You can actually use outline mode to actually collapse headings, but it doesn't work very well. So what literate programming will allow us to do is, instead of actually editing the file as it is here, what we do is we have the init.el file stored in an org file under source code blocks, and what we can then do is edit the file and the code in the org file and tangle or write out the contents of those org source blocks to the init.el file. So what you can actually do is, instead of having one code block with the entire file, you can actually split the file into separate code blocks and have those code blocks under their own headings like this. So you can see here at the top we've got emacs init, and that corresponds to first code block here. Now to edit these, what we do is we run Control-C, comma. We can then edit the file here, on Control-Save, Control-C to go back to the document. Then when we want to actually write out or tangle these files, I'll come down here. Typically what most people do using literate programming is they will have all the org source blocks, as I've shown you, separately instead of one big file, and they will tangle the entire document to write out all those source code blocks to the init.el file. Now the issue with that is this only allows you to tangle or write the file to one location. Also, what it means is, in my setup here, I have all my dot files in one org file, and I don't want to write them out, all of those files out, every time I make a change in Emacs. So what I'm doing is a slightly different way, and this is using noweb. And what this allows me to do is actually reference the code blocks and write them out to different locations, so that I can write the init.el file into my Git repository, but also my home directory. So what I'm going to do is actually switch across to GitHub and show you how this looks on GitHub and how this will actually render. So what we have here is the title up here, dotfiles, and what I have here, as I showed you in a previous video is a changelog. So what this is this is a org file that will display all of the git commits for a particular repository. So I can see here the GitHub URL of my org file and dotfiles, and all of the latest changes that I've made. So what we have there is the changelog. Then what we have here is the tree. So this is a tree view of the Git repository. So what we have here, if I come up to tree, what we have here is a source code block like this, and what we just do is run Control-C, Control-C on that block, and this will output the tree view of all the files in the Git repository. But what you actually need to do is, when you run Control-C, Control-C here, it'll add a results header above the example, and you have to remove that or it won't render in GitHub. So that's the tree. So what I'm going to do now is actually show you the structure of the Emacs file. So first of all, we've got some notes about tangling the dot file. So you can either tangle the document with Control-C, Control-V, T, or just one block using Control-U, Control-C, Control-V, T. What we have down here is the configuration for Emacs split into separate blocks, each under their own heading. So the advantage of this is that it makes it much easier to actually find everything in your org file, but also on GitHub. So you can see here, these all correspond to these different headings. I'll come back here. So these headings here correspond to the headings on GitHub. So you can see we have sort of named anchors for all of these, so it makes it easy to share the code. You can just copy the code like this. So what you have is the file split into chunks. And what this allows you to do, if I come down here, for example, is actually add notes outside of the source code block. So for example, for themes, what I can do is, let me come into the themes to show you. What I'm doing is I'm using begin quote, you can see here, the URL for the Git repository. So this shows you that this is a quote from this package explaining what it does. So we've got the heading quote and the URL and then the source code block here. And what I'm doing is I'm still keeping the actual comments of how the code works in the code block so that it's actually in the file as opposed to the org file. But this makes it much easier to actually go through and annotate the code in an org file for GitHub, so that you can put in sort of notes like this, where all the packages have actually come from. Okay, so it's much easier to actually break this down and understand it. So let's come across to the file here, and then I'll show you how to actually create this. So another advantage of this is that you can actually move these items up and down. So suppose gp.el. So for example here, gp.el, this is a really long block of code. Okay, this goes on forever. It's basically a load of gp.el tools which actually work with Emacs that I'll have to show you in another video. You can see that's going on forever. So if I come down to gp.el down here, I just have this code block to work on. So let's see how many lines that is. That's still 800 lines of code. But the advantage is you could move that up and down. You can move these items up and down to rearrange the order in your init.el. So trying to sort of manually select this block of code is going to be a pain, and you know what's going to happen. You get halfway through and you accidentally deselect everything and you've got to go to the beginning. So what this allows you to do is actually move these items up and down, or just delete the heading to delete the code block if you no longer need it. So it's a much more modular way of being able to manage your init.el as opposed to having it in one big file. And they said all we need to do is we can come in something, edit, save it, and then what we do to actually write out the file, we come down to emacs tangle, and what you can see here is I have separate headings for each file. So for example, init.el, I would just put my cursor over the code block and run Control-U, Control-C, Control-V-T, and that will tangle or write out the content of that, all those code blocks to this location. So now there is some setup to get this working. I'm going to actually take you through and show you how we can set this up so you can basically import your init.el file and easily chunk it up under different headings. So what I'm going to do is actually create this structure in the org file that I'm going to show you, where we have emacs config, emacs tangle. So what we also want to do is have these header args. So I'm just going to copy this and we'll call this test.org. Okay. What we're going to do is actually create the files. So we've got dotfiles, emacs, and emacs config and emacs tangle. And this will make sense. Emacs config, emacs tangle. Okay, so we're now going to create init.el. Okay, so what we've got here, let me just check the structure we've got. So this is an important part. I'm going to show you the properties drawer. So I'm going to take this step by step. So first of all, what we want to do is actually import the entire init.el. So we're going to run S and tab, and then emacs lisp. And what we're then going to do is run Control-C, comma, and that puts us in this mode here where we can edit the block. And the reason why you want to do this as opposed to just editing the file, the source code block directly in the org file, is this will actually enable all the special modes for the mode that you're using, like elisp or whatever, whereas it doesn't in the org file. So we're going to run Control-I .config emacs init.el. Okay, so what we now have is a entire file. You can see here I have a heading structure so that it makes it easier to scan through by having a line, the comment, and another line, so it just makes it visually easy to go through. So what we need to do is split this code block into multiple bits and then have a heading on each one of these. So what we want to do is we want to have this under Emacs startup hook like this. We want to have the next section as bootstrap use package. So how do we actually chunk this up without doing lots of copying and pasting? I mean, sure, we could come through and we could go through and select this and create a new source code block and paste it in, but that's long. Okay. So I was watching one of Prot's videos and he showed a top tip, and that is called org demarc block. And what this does is it splits code blocks at the cursor by running Control-C, Control-V, D. So I'll show you how this works. So we have this block here, and what we want to do is we want to split it here. Control-C, Control-V, D. Yeah, can you see what's just happened? What it's done is you may need to change some lines, but you can see it's split the code block into two. So now what we can do is we'll put a heading here. So this is Emacs startup book. Okay, and the next one is bootstrap packages or something. Okay. So then what you do is you just move on to the next part. Put your cursor here, Control-C, Control-V, D, splits. So we can then put in the heading, so say something like Melpa. So you just go through your document like this and split it. Oops. Oops. Themes. Okay, so you get the idea. So what I've done is basically gone through and split the entire file into all these separate elements like this. Go through, depending on your how you've got your init.el commented out, just Control C, Control V, D, split it, then just Alt return, and it's automatically going to add the correct number of headings. So I had themes there. I should have actually had themes once, but you get the idea. Right. So the next issue that we've got is, you can see none of these have got names. What I want to do is actually come across and show you some differences with how this works. So what I've got here is a test block of code. So you can see here, what we actually need to do is we need to actually be able to reference all these code blocks. Yeah. So as I said, you can, one way to do it is you just split it up like this, and you have a setting where you specify where it's going to tangle the files, and you tangle the entire document. That, in my opinion, is a bit overkill, because it means you can only really have one file in that org file. You can only have, because otherwise, if you have multiple files like this, you can see here I've got emacs, home manager, flakes, nix, tofi, systemd, podman, alacrity. I don't want to tangle all those things in the document every time I change emacs. That doesn't make any sense. I want to be able to just tangle the files for emacs. So what I want to do is actually take you through how this works. Yes, you can tangle the entire document, but what I want to show you is how noweb works. So in this instance, what I'm doing is I'm giving each of these blocks the same name. You can see here, name early init2.el. So this is the early init file that I've chunked up into separate sections and given each one of these a name, early init2.el, like this. Right. Then what we have up here is another source code block, and you can see what it's doing is it's using something called noweb. And what this allows us to do is, instead of putting all the code in this block, we can reference the names that it uses, and it's basically like an alias. It's like an alias to where the code is, but then the code will all show up here. So what we're saying here is we've got a name, early init tangle, emacs lisp tangle to early init2.el, noweb yes, early init2.el. So that's referencing all those code blocks. Right, so you'd think, okay, I'll just name all the code blocks the same thing, and then tangle them. And then look what happens. I come into early init2. You see, it's not got the entire file. It's just got the end of the file. It's got part of the beginning of the file, and it's missing the middle, and it's just got the end. Okay? So we can't give these all the same name manually by adding those files like that. Okay? So what I want to do is actually show you how we solve this issue. Your second thought might be, okay, I can't name all these things. I can't give them all the same name like this. Name early init.el, early init.el. That's not working when I tangle it. Yeah, using this syntax. So your next thought might be, okay, well, I'll go through and I'll give each one of these a unique name. So I'm going to call this like name garbage, name UI, Scratch, Lisp. The issue is if you do that, what you then have is you have to put each one of those in here. So you'd have to write like garbage, let me just delete that, garbage, UI, scratch. Okay, so you'd have to go through and manually add all those names. That's all right for the early init. There's only 4. We have a look at the emacs init.el. If you were to do it that way, what it would mean is you'd have to go through and add a name for each one of these blocks. Okay, you'd have to put a name for each one of these blocks, and then you would have to put all of those references under here. So you'd have about 20 or 30, and sod's law, you know you're going to miss one putting it in, so you're going to constantly be checking, okay, how many of those have I got compared to how many are down here? That's not going to work, is it? I'm going to show you a trick, a neat trick. What we can actually do, okay, let me just find it. So what you see here is this structure. We got, let me just close this. Got emacs config, init.el, early init. And what you'll see here is we've got all the code blocks, as I said, and none of them have names. Yeah. What you'll see here is the properties drawer. If I expand this, what you'll see is the secret source. Header args, noweb-ref, early init, noweb-sep. What is all that? Okay, so what this noweb-ref does is this actually adds each of these. It kind of uses the name early init for each of these, which I just told you doesn't work using the other method. Using this method, it does. So rather than putting names manually on each one of these, like name, you know, early init.el, which I showed you doesn't work having the same name because it doesn't tangle the entire file, or, you know, manually putting garbage like that. What this does is this applies this noweb reference early init to all of the code blocks under this subtree. Yeah. Now the next issue that actually happens is if I take this out. Okay. Right. So this is the code block that's going to tangle all the early init down here using the reference. And what I've purposefully done is remove part of the code. So to show you another issue, Control U, Control C, Control V, T. You see it now tangled the early init. Can you spot the problem? Look at the code blocks. You can see here there is no, this is the first code block, it ends here. There's no new line between this and the next code block. You can see here. Right. So how do we solve that? Okay. Back. Oops. So I've shown you we can use the header args in the properties on a subtree to automatically add the noweb reference early init, which we can then use to tangle it. Using this extra option, noweb separator, 2 new lines. What happens when we do that? You'll see now each code block has an extra line after it so that it doesn't butt up against the next code block like this. Yeah. So that's the other option. That's the other thing we actually needed to get working, is having the code blocks not butt up against each other. When you tangle the entire file, okay, it will automatically add a new line after each code block, so you don't get that issue. But if you use noweb, it doesn't. So that's why we need the combination of these two things, the noweb-ref and the noweb separator. Let me try and just get this into your head, how this all works. So we got the emacs file heading, config, and tangle. Under those we have the files, and under the top level here, init.el, we have the properties drawer. And you do that with all properties, property, so that's Control-C, Control-X-P. And we would then select header arg, so args. Right, Control-C, what was it? All properties, properties, Control-C, Control-X-P. Control-C, Control-X-P, header args. We would then type in the, oh, it's coming up with the things we already got. So yeah, we can just select this one. Okay, you're not going to let me select it now, you bastard. Control-C, Control-X-P, header args. Okay, I had to tab in there. Okay. So what you'll see there is we've added the header args with noweb-ref, the name of the noweb reference we're going to use, and noweb separator. Right. So what this does is this basically applies init.el as the noweb reference for each of these code blocks without us having to manually type in name plus name. And it said, remember, the issue is you can't give them, if you do it manually, you can't call them all init.el, right? Because that doesn't work, I showed you. So you have to give them a unique name. But if you do that, then the problem is, as I said, you'd have to have multiple ones of these listed here, and that's going to get quite tricky, having to go through and copy all the names from all of these, make sure you don't make any mistakes or miss any out. And if you move one of these blocks, suppose you just, you know, oh, I don't want Corfu anymore, and you deleted that code block, you'd then also have to delete it from here. Okay, so let's recap over how this works. So we've got our org file, we've got the title. You want the header args make directory p, yes, and what that does is when you tangle files, it will create the necessary directories if they don't exist. So as I said, we've got the heading, emacs, config, and tangle. We've got the properties drawer, as I showed you how to set up. And in the properties drawer, what you want to have is two things. You want to have the noweb-ref, and the naming structure that I'm using the same noweb-ref as the actual file that's going to be created. So in this case, it's init.el. Then we have the noweb-sep and two new lines, so that we'll add a new line after each code block when we tangle it. Oh. Then what we just do is we have the document chunked up as I showed you. So you just go through here, Control-C, Control-V, D, Control-C, Control-V, D. You just split the document up, put in the headings, and eventually when you've gone through the whole document, you'll have it all split up like this. Yeah. So remember to add the we don't need to add any names or anything. And then what you can do is, what I would recommend is actually adding in the link to the Git repository for the packages. So this makes it really handy to actually be able to go through. And what I also thought was nice was using the quote. And okay, so accessible themes to Judah. Okay, so basically I just copied that bit of code, text rather, and use it in a quote along with the link and wrong one. And another tip. So we have everything under separate headings, and your first thought might be, I could do with a table of contents, but you can't use a table of contents directly in the org file. It only works when you export it. But if you come to GitHub and have a look at the outline hamburger menu here, what you'll see is we have a nice way to navigate the document now. So what we've got here is emacs. See here, emacs config, init.el, and then all these headings. Those are going to correspond to these things here. So it makes it really easy to come through and go, okay, tab bar mode, bang, jump straight to that point. Then we have a little explanation of what tab bar mode is, and then the link to the package, and then the actual configuration. As I said, some people put all the explanation of what stuff does outside the code, but kind of the issue then is if you're actually looking at the file, you don't have that explanation. So I tend just to keep the comments in the code as opposed to outside it. But that's just sort of my choice. But this just makes it really easy to come through. And what I wanted was a consistent look and structure for each of these where they're using external packages, where I'd have the little explanation, the link to the Git repository, and then the code like this. So it makes it really easy to actually come through and navigate to the different bits of your code. So here you can see we've got the early init, the garbage collection. And as you'll see, because these are all headers, they're all anchors. So we actually get a unique URL for each of these, and we can easily jump to them, which makes it easy to actually sort of share the code, as opposed to let me just come up. Config. Where's emacs init.el. So rather than actually linking to the init.el, and the issue is if you do that and you change the file, you gave someone a link to like line 54, but then you change stuff and move it, that link's no longer going to work. It's going to point to something else. By having this, you can ensure you've got a link that's always actually going to refer to what it's supposed to. In this case, like Yaz snippet. So it just makes it easy to actually go through and go, okay, yeah, here's the settings for GP.tel. And as you can see, it's much easier to go through a single block of code rather than 2,000 lines. Okay, so that's how this all works. We have the code split up into blocks using the org demarcate, with each bit of code under its own heading, as I've shown you. And on the subtree, using the org properties, we set the header args to noweb-ref, init.el, noweb-sep, and 2 new lines. And what that does, as I said, that will basically give all the code blocks under this subtree a noweb reference of init.el. And this solves the two problems that I was explaining, that if you manually give them all names of init.el, it doesn't work. The other option is to manually give each one a unique name, but then that makes a lot more work having to type out all the names and also reference them. So we have that, and then simply under the tangle section, what we have here is the home directory and the current directory. So this allows us to actually tangle to multiple places at once. You can also tangle using tramp and SSH, so that you could actually tangle these files to another server. It'll give you a lot more flexibility as opposed to tangling the entire document. So all I need to do after I've made all the changes, okay, that's the other thing I should mention is you can't manually tangle these code blocks, okay? So you can see here at the moment these haven't got tangle on them. Let me find. I'll show you what I'm talking about. One I was working on. Okay. So this is something. Yeah, it should be early in it. Delete this section here. So what I want to also show you is what happens if you manually tangle code blocks. I'm just kind of going through all the different permutations of how this works that I've tried. Okay, so what we have here, oops, I think we've got one wrong. Delete those. Okay. So what I'm doing here to show you that it doesn't work is putting the tangle on each code block. So what you might think you could do is, okay, new change. Just imagine there was some code under this. Saved it, Control-C, comma. Okay, so if I just tangle this code block, Control-C, Control-U, Control-C, Control-V, E, you can see, yeah. Let me just delete that. Hang on, you bastard. Right. Okay, yeah, so if I tangle this code block, you can see that's tangled that code. But what you would have to do is go through each one and tangle each one after the other. Okay, but then what you'll see is it hasn't actually appended them, it's overwritten. So what happens is you might be thinking, okay, if I just tangle them all to the same place, yeah, that's going to work, isn't it? So that I can just come through edit one and tangle it. So even if you tangle them all one after the other, they get overwritten. And the issue is you couldn't have, there isn't a way to actually just sort of say, okay, edit this bit of code and tangle it into the document. So I just wanted to point out that this method doesn't work tangling them all with the same name because it just overwrites the file, okay? So that's what I wanted to show you. So we have the noweb reference. The structure of this is, these are the blocks. So we've got two sets of code blocks. We've got the code blocks with the actual sort of code in here, which don't have any names, and has the properties on the subtree, the noweb-ref, init.el, noweb separator. And then for the tangle section, what we have is a name, begin source, emacs, lisp, noweb, yes, tangle, and then the path to the file we want to tangle. And again, the important thing is you need the header arg, make directory p yes, so that it will actually create any directories it needs. And what you'll see down here is this sort of bit of code. And what this does is this is the noweb reference, and it refers to init.el, which is the name and the subtree properties, okay? So what this means is it's going to take all the code blocks called init.el, which were automatically using the noweb reference, and it's going to tangle or write them to this location. Yeah. And again, the other important thing you have to have is the noweb separator, so that it'll actually add the extra lines. So that's pretty much the gist of it. As said, I have current directory and home directory. So if I show you my nixos.files, so you see here, there's the nixos.files.org file. That's this file on GitHub. But then I also have the entire set of files that are going to be written out in the GitHub repository as well. So you can see here, config, all these files. And the reason for this is so that I've actually got a second layer of backup. So you can see that that actually corresponds to the tree view. If I can scroll back up here and hide that. So you can see this tree view corresponds to everything in the Git repository like this. So the advantage of this is I can actually see the entire structure of all my .files, and suppose something went wrong with emacs and it wouldn't open or something and I couldn't tangle the files. I've still got all the files actually listed there. That makes it really easy to kind of go through stuff, and also it just makes it more flexible rather than just having the org file. You've got all the files sort of tangled out. So you actually got 3 levels of backup. You've got all the code in the org file. So that's all my .files are stored in the org file as separate little code blocks. Come up and show you like home manager. So they're all stored there. Then they're all also stored individually in the Git repository, and also written to the correct locations in my home directory. So it just means that you've got sort of multiple levels of redundancy in case anything goes wrong. So I think this is a really nice way of actually managing your sort of .files a bit more easily, especially for Emacs. So as I said, I don't actually come through and edit my init.el file like this. What I'll do is I'll come through, okay, I want to do something on which key. I can come through, and I said you don't edit the file directly in here, okay? You run Control-C, comma, and then you edit it in this mode, and that is because this is a specialized mode that will work with the eLisp file. So if you're just here and you're editing, you're in org mode. Yeah, you can see down here we're in org mode. When we edit here, we're in eLisp mode, right? I'll show you another example. I'm now in Nix mode. So what this means is when you run Control-C, comma, it will actually put you in that other window where it's using the correct mode for the code. Yeah. And there is org block. There is a setting I've got here that I can't remember where it is. Org babel. So by default, what happens is it will open in a split. But there is, let me have a look, see if I can find it in here. there is an option to actually get it to open full screen. The buffer list. Oh yeah, and another useful option is man notify method bully. While I think of it, so if you do man and just like ffmpeg, what it will do is it will come up full screen as opposed to in a split. But what I was just wondering is there is an option which I can't remember where it is for org mode and setting the sort of buffers to appear in a separate window. I just can't remember where it is offhand, but it is in my sort of configuration, because basically what I was saying is when you edit these, you can see this is going full screen. By default, it kind of opens it in a split. So if I find it, I'll put a link to it if I find it in the documentation. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Let's come back to the test. So basically we created a file like this, title, header args, make directory p, dotfiles, emacs, config, tangle, init.el. We imported the whole block, remember, and then we used org demarcate. So you can see here, this is like set queue. So let's scroll down a bit. So Control C, Control V, D, that splits it. Alt return, that adds the heading. So tab bar mode. Just come down. So go through. Yeah, okay. So you go through, and that's how you sort of divide it up. And once you've divided it up, it'll look like this, right? So again, the important thing is we have to set the properties on the header. Let me just show you, make sure you've got the properties. So init.el. So we want header args. So that's Control C, Control X, P. Header args. We'll yank it in. Okay. So the two important things: the noweb reference, which gives each block a reference of init.el, and then the noweb separator to add 2 new lines to the end of each code block. And then for the emacs tangle, look at that. I mean, it's just the way I like to do it. We've got home directory and then current directory. And you can see here, we're just using the noweb reference name in each one of these. And that will basically take all of those code blocks, concatenate them one after another, add a new line between each one of them, and create the entire file. And the advantage of doing it this way is you don't have to tangle the entire document, which is just like kind of overkill, really. And as I said, that really wouldn't work with my setup, which has got multiple kind of bits of code in. So kind of hope that makes sense. And as I said, it's just much nicer. Let me just see if I've got an old I can show you the difference between the old way I was doing it on 2 dotfiles. Okay. Okay. Okay, so this is it as a single file. So this is my old Ubuntu.files where you can see I've just got a single code block like this. You can just scroll through, and the issue is if you go to the outline, you can see it's just one code block. It's not showing up as separate things, so I can't jump to anything, versus this method. If I put the outline on, just come to emacs, we've got all the different code blocks, so you can easily see, okay, this is the startup hook, the bootstrap, themes. We have the nice little quote from the Git repository, the link to the package. So actually putting in all the links to the packages is really helpful because it's really easy to forget. So you can easily just jump down to these sections, and when you want to come through and edit stuff, you can easily just come through fonts, Control-C, comma, make some changes, Control-X, S, Control-C, like that. Then when you want to tangle it, so this is why we have these under separate config and tangle, so you can just boom, like that, expand that, and then all you got to do is run Control-U, Control-C, Control-V, T on each one of these. And I'd recommend actually putting those notes in the document, so you can see here, this is how you tangle the entire document, Control-C, Control-V, T. Tangling only one block is done with a CU prefix, and you can also tangle the entire file using emacs on the command line with the batch option like this. So this is just the sort of structure that I like to set up. And again, on the tree view, what we just need to do is copy, get rid of these, and I'll show you. Okay, so for the tree view, I'm going to delete this. So all you do, the tree view here, -A is to show hidden files. I.git will hide the Git repository. We just run Control-C, Control-C, and why is yeah, it's only showing the tree view on the desktop. You can see here, but what I wanted to mention is you can see it's got this results tree listing. So it's taking this tree listing from the name up here. But what you need to do is you need to delete this results thing before you upload it to GitHub. Because if you upload it to GitHub with the results thing here, you won't actually get the tree view. It won't render, it will just render that part there. So again, okay, delete the results thing here, and what you'll see is result output verbatim draw replace wrap example, and the wrap example wraps the code in an example code block, and that is needed for it to actually render properly on GitHub. If you use a quote, it will mangle it all into one big thing, so you have to use the example code block for that. Again, just make sure you've got the properties set under on the subtree like this with noweb-ref. It's also a good idea to put an example block in there with the actual path to the file, just so you can see it at a glance. And then all you have is the different headings like this. Now I didn't. My other thought was to actually group these under separate sections like themes, packages, functions, or whatever. So there'd be wouldn't be so many. The issue with that is then you'd have to kind of look inside them, inside the folder to see them. And also it means you wouldn't be able to move these up and down. So what I was saying is I can move these items up and down. So if I do that, put the functions up there and tangle, and I need to I just need to change this. So if I tangle this, it's going to actually create a .config directory. The .config emacs init.el, and you'll see we've moved the functions up. Okay. Where is it? This one. Okay. So big init. So what I was saying is you can move these up and down. Oops. I don't know why it does that. Sometimes we don't like me doing that. I always forget what the keyboard shortcut is. Okay, you can move these up and down. And then when you actually tangle it again, so your cursor's got to be on the code block, run Control-U, Control-C, Control-V-T. If I come back in, it will have actually sort of moved whatever it was I moved. But it basically, it's a good way to we'll do it with a bigger one actually. Let's do that GP-tel one. I want to move that right up here for some reason. Caps the config. And just see we've got functions, and we should have GP-tel. Yep. Okay. So you can't do that really easily in a directly. If you want to move stuff about, you kind of got to select it all, and then you delete it. But the kind of issue is, and then save it. But then you kind of like, it's in the buffer, and is it going to be saved and mangled or whatever? And you kind of got to paste it. You kind of say, I want to reorder these. Cut, paste. It's a bit messy, so actually having it like this just allows you to easily move stuff up and down. You can double click, delete it, paste it back in, and then just retangle it, and it will tangle in the correct order. I hope that all made sense and is useful, but I think that's just a much nicer way of having your init.el file broken up so that you can edit it more easily, but also when you have got it on GitHub instead of just like one big long file like this. Okay, we have a nice, easy to navigate file, each with a unique URL, so we can link to it, and we can easily do stuff like put in notes and links, that sort of thing. I'll put links to all this under the video. Hope it helps you get set up and switch from having a big, massive init.el file, which is difficult to manage, to being able to split it up into smaller chunks under separate headings in an org file, so that you can easily edit it and move things around and document it more easily. And it does actually make a difference. I did find a couple of errors having stuff split up, a couple of duplicate package settings, that kind of thing. So having it all split up does make it easier to actually go through the code, rather than having several thousand lines of code, which gets a bit messy. So that's all for now. I'll put links to all this under the video, and remember the special command you want is org demarcate block, and that was a prop tip, and that splits code blocks at the cursor running Control-C, Control-V-D.